So this year's theme for ETS, as you can see up there, Keep Earth Weird, was kind of developed around the idea that the industry is moving forward so rapidly and it's changing and technology is sort of propelling that change. But we need to keep people at the center and keep them in mind as everything evolves. So this panel is really going to focus on the customer and keeping people at the center when designing new utility programs. So please welcome my panelists. We've got Vanessa, Lon, Jeff, and Denise. And I'll let you all introduce yourselves a little bit as we get into the conversation, but we'll just kind of jump right into things. So my question for the utilities on the panel, Vanessa, I'll start with you since you're right next to me. How does your organization actually approach designing new customer programs?
Thank you. So Vanessa Barbarisi with AES. AES is a global company. I'm within our utilities vertical. So I actually work for Indianapolis Power and Light, now AES Indiana. Dayton Power and Light is now AES Ohio. And then we have 4 utilities in El Salvador. And I'm working on the transformation for all 6 of those utilities at this time. When we think about the programs across the board, we have very different regions, right? 2 different countries, very different regulatory environments between the 3 jurisdictions, but really looking at customers as our partner, thinking through how we help them maintain control and don't have a bill be a surprise, making sure that along the way we have omnidirectional conversations, we're pulling them into decision making and really allowing for less disparate or pocketed programs, which we've seen in the past through DSM, DR initiatives.
Great, thanks. And Lon?
Great, well, I'll add to that. Lon Huber, Duke Energy. We're a small mom and pop utility that spans from Ohio, Indiana to Florida. My team works on customer solutions all throughout those states. And our approach, in addition to what you heard, which is great, we take an ecosystem approach to our products and services to comprehensively solve our customers' needs. So if you almost think of like a galaxy of stars, right? We're building out all these different products and services that a customer can go to. And so you sort of think of a path through based on an individual persona or what their goals are. We just make sure that we can comprehensively solve their needs in a way that brings a lot of value and more value as they go deeper into the whatever ecosystem they're interested in. And then we try to connect those ecosystems to other things. So let me just give you an example. We have a net zero home ecosystem. So think smart home tech, solar, storage, things of that nature. Well, a customer that's inclined to participate in that is also likely to participate in getting an electric vehicle. So that's a whole nother ecosystem where we take it from A to Z, get the infrastructure set, get a charger for them, say like a subscription rate design, $24.99, all you can manage charge. So we think of it comprehensively through that type of lens, and then from there we take it in stages of a discover, that's technology, that's what do customers want, and incubate, that's where we're fine-tuning things out in the field. To accelerate, that's where we're scaling everything up, making sure things are sustainable, both financially, labor-wise, and so forth, and then finally operate and maintain. So that's think of the adoption curve going up. So that's how we start to approach it.
Great, thanks. And Denise?
Hi, good morning. I think it's still morning. Denise Munoz. I'm the Director for Strategic Planning and Innovation within our Customer Solutions team, ComEd, not to be confused with Con Ed. We serve the northern third of Illinois, including Chicago. And most folks, hear Chicago and think, wow, we're just serving the city. And actually, we have a very diverse customer base. We go to the border of Wisconsin. We go as far west as Iowa, and then we stop kind of in the top third and go out to Indiana. So with that, we serve a very large base of not only residential but low-income customers. Rural customers actually make up quite a bit of our population in Illinois. And I was going to take the approach that we obviously use innovation is part of our process. And depending on what we're specifically focused on, I mean, we have a very large energy efficiency portfolio. We currently, I believe, have one of the largest in the country, which is, we average about $425 million currently. And with that, we have a very active research and development budget, and we create a microsite, and we communicate out to the community, out to our, our vendors, our trade allies, and customers, that if they have, ideas, we actually ask for ideas quarterly. And then we have a screening process that we utilize to go through and, determine, if these are good fits, for not only from an energy efficiency measure, but, to serve some of the diverse customer needs that we're looking for. And again, as I mentioned, that takes about, we do that, 4 times a year. We're innovating even further currently, because I also have, at least in Illinois, the color of money is important. Energy efficiency in Illinois is a regulatory asset versus the other funding that we have, which is, considered part of our distribution rate base. But now we are looking to actually create a new microsite, so that we're not only innovating on the energy efficiency side, but we're also looking to innovate on the technology side. So that could be grid, interconnectivity, load flexibility, but things that, again, we can combine with our energy efficiency team and holistically serving our customers.
Great, thanks. And Jeff, question for you, kind of coming from that customer side. What are some of the barriers that customers face when, trying to enroll in new programs?
Sure. So, quick introduction. I'm Jeff Wahl, Vice President of Strategy and Growth at Bidgely. Bidgely is an energy software analytics and insights company that works with a lot of the utilities here in attendance at ETS. I'm on the stage. And really, functionally, the way in which we approach sort of the customer part, right? You have utilities that are thinking critically about how to set up the systems, how to design sort of the right package for ecosystem, as Lon said, for customers. But there's always fundamentally this friction with a customer, when we can just use enrollment as an example. Customers know very little about energy, and we can't expect them to change that overnight. And yet, simultaneously, in sort of a juxtaposition, there's more awareness of energy than ever before. So you have a hungry customer base that wants to know more, but really doesn't have a way to go and tackle that. And I think we as vendors and as utilities have to get rid of the myth of self-selection, that customers are just going to buy these new devices or see climate change and sort of raise their hands. And so when we think about that part of the paradigm, we think about knowing everything you can know about the individual in order to sort of build a bottom-up approach to serving them, right? The structures that the utilities have put in place, often they'll do in coordination with a vendor like a Bidgely, where you're going to look at sort of the capacity that you have, whether it's a residential or a commercial SMB customer. You want their feedback. But there was actually, it was Denise from OUC yesterday shared, when you're thinking about a parallel industry, she said retail, right? The way in which I get 14, 15, 16 touch points, which is a scary number to most utilities, right? To touch your customers that much. And it's not moving towards being a retailer, but it's acting like one. It's understanding sort of at that same level of depth all of the different things about a customer. And to use a very sort of specific example, there are a growing number of EV owners, right? Early adopters moving into the next part of that adoption curve. And while they know there are generically utility programs, oftentimes they're either busy, they're unaware of where to go, they don't get your emails, or it goes to the spam folder, or whatever it might be. And so they're not raising their hands. And where Bidgely sits in all of this is actually looking at their consumption profile, understanding the unique characteristics of device type, efficiency, capacity, and then bringing that back into the fold for the utility to then use in a very personalized way of pulling that customer into the program to get them to do not only what you want them to do, but subjectively what they're attempting to do and just don't know how. And so, again, that push is sort of from 2 angles, right? Designing programs and then finding the people and sort of giving them the ROI for joining those programs.
So kind of following up on what Jeff was talking about, how do you guys as the utilities actually communicate new programs to your customers? Vanessa?
I think there's still an area of opportunity there. In a slightly different format, part of what we would like to move to is less, again, of those individual program structures, but more of a tiered approach so that customers can choose what the right level is for them. Complex rates shouldn't be complex for customers. That's our problem as a utility. And we need to find ways to support customers and the goals that they have by providing them with the structure that meets their needs without them having to research it, without them having to think about it too much. We can't live without power. You have to have it, and it doesn't have to be something that they need to know everything about. And so when we're communicating with our customers, it's in a way that is not just transactional in nature, but informative, engaging, working through multiple channels, and again, an area of opportunity because there are so many channels today between social media and everything else that one can do. So we're trying to work on that space while meeting regulatory needs. We have DSM programs as well where it's a part of our IRP, but how do we structure that again in a way that creates a more holistic and transparent approach so that the customer can continue making other decisions that they have to make in their day-to-day life and not be bogged down with utility decision-making.
Thanks. Lon?
So we've built an advanced insight model that takes their hourly or sub-hourly consumption data, overlays it with everything we know about the customer from their history with Duke, and then layered on third-party demographic data. And so we're able to come up with propensity models, with next best action, just really understanding the customer, and then we can be proactive, as discussed through all the different various channels. We can also be better at the reactive mode. When they call in, hey, I need help with my bill, great, well, here's a new time of use rate design. We've analyzed your historic data. You'll save $5 a month. If you join to this, you can lock in those savings with a smart thermostat that we can get to you for free, through partnerships, through our EEDR programs. So those are ways we do it. So again, just variety of different channels, depends on the program, depends on the customer segment. But at the end of the day, we're trying to use insights to really figure out how best to add value to the customer while overlaying our overarching strategic goals, which is lower carbon, happier customers, and financially scalable business.
Thanks. And Denise?
I would say a little bit of both of what I just heard. And within customer operations at ComEd, we're actually pretty fortunate that we have the marketing department actually part of customer operations, and we do, want to be very strategic on how we're using our education and awareness dollars. The fact that we have such a large DSM portfolio, and we have, residential, different residential and commercial rates for our customers, but we also realize we have a lot of customers who are in need. So we try and bridge a lot of our efforts and our campaigns with our assistance team. So some folks, right, we feel energy efficiency is a great solution if someone, has affordability, but we do a lot of, propensity modeling. We're trying to understand, like, our customers who are continuously coming back, who need LIHEAP assistance, or like, we need to take this to the next level and having conversations with these customers. But, it's also, it starts with our employees. We do a really, really, extensive job every year, hosting all hands and webinars to inform, our LCS account managers, our governmental and external affairs teams, all of our employees to be ambassadors for us on this. And then we further go out and work. And I think we just heard from the previous gentleman about the alliance with the communities. Community-based organizations are really critical in our efforts, right, to get out just all of the assistance that ComEd has to offer the customers. And that is layered on top of the traditional, efforts like social media, in e-channels, trying to acquire emails for customers, advertising and such. But from a regulatory perspective, we also have to be very careful how much advertising we do, because we can't look to be branding ourselves. It really needs to be about the message that we're trying to communicate to our customers.
So when thinking about new programs, they have to make sense economically, both for the utility and the customer. So Lon, this question's for you, but anyone else feel free to chime in too. what are some of the main considerations when you're designing rates for new programs?
That's a good question. It's multifaceted. I think, first starting with the customer, we have to be customer centric, and we have to understand that some customers want different things, have different risk tolerances, levels of sophistication. So we want to give rate options that span the gamut of something with just complete certainty for the customer over the next year, same price every month, to really advanced dynamic time of use rates with critical peak pricing. The key there is that underpinning all of those rates is the same basic economic model that makes sure that there's no big cross-subsidization or some weird outcome that happens on any of those rates. So behind the scenes is a common model that ensures that nothing really gets out of whack. And that's sort of the key thing when you have a shared infrastructure network that utilities have. You've got to be equitable, and you have to make sure that you don't build up some weird discrepancy that all of a sudden leads to some really horrible economic inequality or systemic inequalities out there. And so when when you hear some of the old past discussions about certain technologies and the compensation structure, what was lacking is a common framework underpinning it so that you could treat everything the same, whether it's that certainty or that TOU, you're pricing everything the same. So when you're looking at, hey, how can I get a product and service to, say, an upper income household? Well, you would know with market research and experience, they probably only need a 10% return. But there's stakeholders, advocates, others, they'll come in and be like, no, commission, they should get a 20% return because we really want to encourage this technology. So now you're pushing forward systemic income inequality within your shared infrastructure network, and you don't even need to because they would have adopted at half the price, right? And so, but people get religious to some degree about some of these things, right? And so you're like, oh, well, you're trying to lower compensation. It's like, no, I'm just actually trying to reduce carbon for the best possible price for all customers.
Jeff, I see you nodding along. You have thoughts?
Yeah, just this idea that that there's free ridership inherently built into that, right? And so I think often it's lost, and a bit of this is in the storytelling, right, that the utility has to do not only to the regulators but also to the customers themselves, is that the net benefit of what Lon described is actually for everybody, right? There's the indirect benefit, and that's the hardest part of the whole picture. And a lot of that is just that it's at a too high of a level to sort of be applied. And so I think I go back to, again, a very bottom-up model as best you can. There are packages, right? Vanessa and I were talking about this, right? You build these things out so that they don't have to think too hard about it, but the hard thinking is happening on the utility side. And there are a lot of tools, disparate tools out there to kind of put that picture together, both ones that utilities build, vendors provide, but the picture that you come back to is this is the optimal outcome, right? We've sort of designed the rate, we've designed the rebate amount, whatever it is, in a way that has a system benefit, not an individual benefit. And when we package things in the past, we tend to just bulk package them, and that's not going to get us very far very fast.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just thinking about the relationship with regulators, and Rayford Smith talked about this a little bit at the end of his presentation as well. You have to have the interveners, the stakeholders, everybody on board, and it takes a lot of external education and communication beyond the customer to make sure that you can get to the state that you need to be in order to best serve that customer. And of course, if there are regulators in the room, I don't know if they attend ETS, but they're an important part of making sure that there's consumer protection in place, and at the same time, there's a huge opportunity to continue working with regulators further to help bring them along in the storyline at a faster rate so that you can have more of those dynamic programs that, again, aren't coming out in these disparate chunks or aren't just regulated, mandated because they're DSM programs. It takes everybody working together in order to have this better solution for the customer and have programs that really make sense at the rate that makes sense.
And it's not easy even for the regulator. I was just having dinner last night at a regulator. You know, it was a controversial decision, and advocates sent people to her personal house to protest. Right. So like, I mean, this is like, some of these get really contentious, even though everybody has the exact same goal. And this is, you see this across the United States now with many utilities. We all have the same goal. Let's get to net zero carbon as quickly as possible. And the question is, how do you most cost effectively do that in the most equitable manner? And that's where you start to run into some sacred, you know, cows or squirrels, as people, you know, not to pick on any type of religion, but like, you know, oh no, like, you will not touch this one incentive that's here. You will not adjust it at all. And, or, you know, you will not start to, you know, think about, well, how do I combine a few of these to get more dispatchability? And so we all have to, I think, take a step back. Let's try to think about this as rationally as possible and look at the numbers of how we can decarbonize in the best possible way.
Denise, could you expand a little bit more on the role of regulators?
Hearing all of this, I hope folks realize that at a minimum, this probably takes 9 months, right, to get through if we want to evolve and get new rates established for our customers. You know, I would say for us, going back to the Alliance, we've formed what we call an Illinois Stakeholder Advisory Group. And it actually started with our very first energy efficiency program. And energy efficiency actually came to the Midwest. We were like one of the last states. So we had a lot to prove to everyone in the state. And, you know, the requirement was, you know, you're going to meet with, you know, a group of stakeholders a minimum of once a month and report out your progress. So it was, you know, we were already like felt like we were getting set up to like fail and we were in trouble. But, you know, it's been 13 years now. We still have the stakeholder advisory group process. We actually now meet weekly because, I mean, it's been such, I know, my team is like, oh my gosh, Denise, there's so many meetings. But right, we bring a lot to the table so that we can resolve issues so we get ahead of, you know, items. So when it does come time to, you know, issue an RFP for new, you know, implementation contractors or you know, any other, you know, needed items, you know, we've got stakeholders who have already been very well informed and educated. They've expressed their concerns. We've addressed them, and we've found that that actually has worked out, you know, as far as facilitating the process. It brings a lot of diverse, you know, thoughts and conversations to the table. But yeah, so now, you know, there's new things being discussed in Illinois as far as, you know, transportation plans and, you know, our multi-year grid investments. And you know, a lot of our internal employees and even our senior leaders have heard that, well, you know, on the energy efficiency side, they have such a great workshopping and stakeholder advisory group. Can we adopt something like that? So we have utilized that at least in the beginning of all these preceding conversations that as we're trying to evolve, you know, energy solutions in the state for our customers.
So weekly meetings for you guys coming up.
I've had weekly meetings for over 2 years with one particular stakeholder topic. So, but I mean, great people, like we've solved a lot of things. So it's like, it's worth it, but people do have to recognize like this takes a lot of investment. And it's great, like it's a super collaborative. We still haven't, you know, there's still some groups that just don't want to be a part of it and they fundraise off of headlines and controversy. But for the most part, we have this great coalition and we're actively solving problems together, but it takes a lot.
Ours isn't one topic. At least we have new topics every week, right? It could be about the technical manual. It could be about policies. It could be about the programs. It could just be about, right, we want an update on, you know, your income eligible spend and how that's going, right? So, you know, yeah, it is a lot, but I think it's well worth the investment, you know, to do that.
So going back to the technology side and kind of touching a little bit on what Jeff talked about before around there being friction for customers. Vanessa, how do you sort of ensure the right technology stack to make, you know, sort of ease some of that friction, make the process more seamless for customers?
Similar to what Duke underwent recently, we are making sure that we have an ecosystem. We actually call it the AES customer ecosystem. And we're replacing our customer information system alongside our field service management system, meter data management, and customer service module. so that we have a really strong core or back-end system that we can use and build on top of, versus, again, going back to that kind of disparate, patched approach. We need to use our strategy and make sure that we have very thoughtful mechanisms in place, so then we can layer in the moments that matter and really build that out to connect with the customer, again, in an outcomes-oriented way. So by having this solution in place, again, similar to what Duke underwent very recently, it makes it easier to build and be responsive, even outside of regulatory 9-month processes to get there. But it allows you to be more responsive because you do have a strong core.
Lon, do you want to
I
talk a
thought
little?
I was so unique with ecosystems, and then I went, I went to CES, and everybody's like throwing up that term, like every company's. I'm like, oh man, I just like now need a new one. So if you guys have any ideas, yeah, I'm thinking the galaxy thing, right? Like I just came up with that because I heard the Earth, and just so I'm open to new ideas, because, but. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, for us it was foundational. You've got to start with the smart grid, the meters, the billing system. So we have a whole new billing system now, and then the tools that I mentioned before, just all sort of layers on top. And then getting to the regulatory side, that's now where the slow part is. And so we are proposing what we call a rapid prototyping policy for the commission. Vermont has something that can show us the way, which is basically, as long as your pilot program falls within certain guardrails and accomplish certain preset objectives, you get rapid approval, like within 15 days, and then you get recovery on it. If you have the tariff and it's successful, it lasts more than a certain amount of years, then you have to formally file it again. But we need our regulatory structures to now match where we are with technology. And we just can't, some of the programs we have are, we've been waiting over 1.5 years, and there's been no opposition to them. So it's like, and everybody's busy, right? So if we can all agree, hey, we want these goals under this dollar amount, there's going to, adhere to these cost safeguards and whatever else, then boom, you'll get approval, unless somebody a commissioner really hates it. So that's how we're thinking about sort of marrying that fast-moving technology to the regulatory world.
Denise, do you have thoughts on technology?
Regulatory question. So yeah, I would say, similar. I mean, as far as I mentioned the pilots, because this was part of our filing up front, again, part of our conversations. We do do some negotiating as well. Maybe there's some stipulations or agreements, but for our pilots, for the most part, that at least serve our energy efficiency programs, we come in and we just share with them these again, this microsite and the criteria for selection, and we come to this SAG meeting twice a year and give an update on that. So we don't get much pushback on those type of pilots, but if we're looking to develop new rates or anything like that, again, after we've gone through a pretty cumbersome process to get those approved, typically, though, for us, the requirements are that, we want more, reporting. We want, an annual report. Can you have these evaluated, presentations? So I would love to see technology being used as well, if there's something they could do to try and, expedite reviews and comments, because, I mean, it just, for us, we see the benefits. If we've had a pilot for 1 or 2 years, I think that's usually, in my opinion, more than enough to determine if this is going to meet, the criteria to be a program. But we have one particular wait. We're in year 4. And it's I don't understand why. And it's on a time of use rate, right? So we're hopeful that maybe something's going to change, once we get to the end of that.
Any
at the
day
end of
it could
2023,
happen.
right? Yeah.
Jeff, from your perspective, how can utilities partner with vendors or service providers to help these technology implementations?
Get unstuck, basically. Listening to sort of the slow part of the process, we know why it exists. I think the fundamental common denominator here is the data, right? I think there are lots of interveners and opinions and sacred squirrels and things like that, and that's what slows us down, because you have to sort of make room and space and sort of equitable opportunity for all participants in that system. But I think the more that utilities and vendors lean into the data that they have, and some of it they have but aren't fully accessing, or they need a vendor's assistance with, it's very difficult either as the end customer or the regulator or the utility to argue with sort of what would be present in the data. These are the DERs we have out there. This is the capacity they have. If we could, we have virtual twins and simulation tools to basically, do amount of forecasting we need to make the case. A lot of the other structural stuff that Lon mentioned, Denise mentioned, smart grid test bed, the quick approval, that's stuff that ultimately fits the bill for what Rayford was also discussing, which is there are smart risks to be taken. And if we are going to get there in any reasonable amount of time, the model has to change, at least in part within the utility and the regulatory world, to a riskier one, right? There are parts of the business that it's reliability, safety, like that won't change. But when it comes to technology, vendors, all they want to do is move fast, not just to make money, but to prove a theory, to prove a concept. The same thing, Lon said it, we all want to win, we all want to get to the same place. So from our perspective as a vendor, it helps to have a utility who has that relationship with the regulator, that's meeting with them weekly, and even at times brings the vendor into the fold to sort of sit there and talk through the things that might be concerning, right? How do you sort of, as a group of three, have that conversation? Sometimes things are arm's length for good reason, but I think more and more these days, being involved way in advance of the thing you're trying to do sets the stage, and you can be very data-centric in your design. Now, I'll add one more caveat. These utilities are great, all utilities are great. A lot of the data is broken, it's in different systems. Like there's this whole, what Vanessa works on, digital transformation occurring at utilities. And so there's also has to be a very top-down commitment throughout a large utility to basically work in an agile Scrum fashion to bring data together through their data architecture, their data lake, and enable technology providers to work quickly within it. Otherwise, we're doing the same thing you do with regulatory. We're just sitting waiting for the utility to hand over the keys so we can get going. And I think, certainly these guys are bought into that, but, as you start to work in these big 5,000, 10,000 person organizations, it definitely gets harder.
Yes, so is that something y'all are doing, like working with data management to be able to do what Jeff was talking about and provide the data needed to the vendors? Or
Yeah, yes. Yeah, you need a center of excellence for your data, and data governance is crucial to anything you want to do. Using SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework, or other agile frameworks are actually challenging within utilities. You can't capitalize those costs. And at the end of the day, it doesn't make financial sense when we move into an agile mode, and we're often left in kind of, you can work internally with an agile fashion, but it's all going to be operational costs. So you got to find that sweet point of what makes business sense and how you're using the data, making sure it's clean, that whole, imagine a utility with perfect data. That's where I'm coming from. And then building from there, but finding that sweet point where your business case is still fully met and being able to capitalize the build.
Yeah, we're on that journey. We announced a big partnership with AWS, and completely agree. And then to your point on the regulation side too, of vendors talking to regulators. How many vendors go to NARUC, a conference for utility regulators, right? It's like, you have just a few, Rayford Smith, when he was with Google, he would have a little booth, but other than that, a few other special interests, and it's like, that's a great forum to talk and just to show the art of the possible a little bit, and so just encourage, folks to think about, how do we go out there and inform and give courage to try some things new. And as mentioned, not all of it will succeed, right? But it's on us to fail small and fast. Not often. I know some people say fail often. You don't have to fail often, just but fail fast Keep it contained, yes, and then move on.
All right, I wanted to go ahead and open it up to audience questions. Anybody out there have a question for the panel? Like everyone else has said, it's super bright up here, so. Oh, there's one over here. Sure.
Conversation on regulatory delay and pilot delay. Just wanted to put a thought in your mind. How much of the pilot delay is around technology evaluation, and how much of it is around value attribution uniquely to a project? Would love your thoughts.
So it's certainly part of it. I think we're, especially staff or the consumer advocate really get hung up as if the utility makes any money on it. And we have, in a lot of our mechanisms, a shared savings, meaning we don't earn anything unless there's savings for all non-participants. So the entire customer base has to have savings, and then from there we get 10% of that. But even that just makes people really upset. So 90-10 split, we get 10%. That's like, oh, I can't believe they're getting 10%. And I'm like, how am I going to get people like, high achievers, like really good people working in my group if they're producing programs that lose the company money? Like, that's a great career builder, right? So like, I'm not going to be able to attract talent if I don't have some skin in the game. I'm not going to be able to command resources that we need from IT and elsewhere. And so a business model part of it is a hang up that's related to the valuation. But typically what we try to do is link it to already, pretty proven cost effectiveness tests, so that, we're not really proposing anything new. It's just sort of evolving what we already have. So that goes a long way. But, it's just like the typical, the question process that takes a while, the procedural schedule that takes a while. And then you have just certain opinions that pop up, and I could have a consensus with 90% of the parties, but then a few loud ones come in and slow down the process.
Hey, David McGowan, consultant to the Army. Lon, I want to flip your comment about NARUC. I think we might be lucky enough to two former commissioners in here, but with all of the stuff you're doing there, I actually do go to NARUC with the Army regularly because I see a big concern, which is a bottleneck coming up here. Look at the salaries, looking at staffing, looking at what regulators are capable of doing, and comparing it to you and, I'll follow this morning's your Googleites. How do they stand a chance of being able to manage the kind of offers and respond in reasonable time unless there's a fundamental change in the staffing in the regulatory system?
Well, I'll start just because I used to work on that side. So I was a lowly consumer advocate, didn't make that much money, but you don't do it for money. You do it for the passion, you do it to learn, you do it because you're early in your career. And so, I do think we need more funding, more tools there for commissions, don't get me wrong. But we shouldn't be encouraging all young people and set up programs of internships to regulatory commissions, to consumer advocates, and to get talent there. But it's not, I wouldn't necessarily look at the salaries because there's other reasons why people do things. So I would also just say there's a trust factor. Does the state have institutions that build trust, or is the commission totally siloed off and they can't talk to anybody, they can't be a part of stakeholder processes, right? So we had a comprehensive rate design review it took over a year. We advanced analytics. We met, with I think it was like 60 to 90 different stakeholder groups within this process. And we all got to general consensus. And because we were in these hours upon hours, we saw all the data, we looked through it, we asked all the questions. The commission could not be a part of that process. So that's not because they don't have the talent, they don't have the tools. It's literally the institutional framework. And so then they just get this report, this consensus report, and they're like, well, I just wasn't a part of that. I don't know if I can trust this.
Is that working? Okay, there you go. Yeah, I would say you know, there are a lot of rules when it comes to meeting with your commissioners. I mean, you just can't have a meeting with all, at least in Illinois, there's 5 commissioners, and actually we've turned over, I believe, almost all of them within the last 2 years, right? So that creates some, like, you know, a little bit of a disadvantage. I mean, it's good that you've got new creative thinking, and you know, hopefully they're coming in with an open mind. A lot of their staff individuals, though, we've seen have been in their roles for actually quite a long time, so that does help us. I mean, there are some commission staff who have been in their roles for 20, 25 plus years in Illinois, but, you know, our regulatory department, again, is one of our stakeholder groups that we have become so much aligned with, because if we do have something that needs to get to a commissioner, right, they need to schedule a meeting. I think they can meet with no more than 2 at a time, right? Those meetings have to be logged, and you're right. I mean, there are so many things at least happening, and you know, there are proceedings and dockets going on, that they really rely on those consensus reports. So they don't always get to be right at the forefront of all these issues and to hear everything. They've got to rely on reading reports in black and white.
Santosh Veda with Dominion Energy. So when we talk about programs, we typically refer to demand response programs where the customers participate. There is a monetization because there is cost savings that gets passed on to the customer. But for instance, we could have customers that have an EV that don't necessarily want $25 a year to participate in those programs, but they might be willing to let us know that there is an electric vehicle located. So how do we go away from just programs as just demand response to things that the customers can do that we benefit from? And is there a way to pass on that value to the customers? For instance, if you have where the electric vehicles are located, or let's say that if they provide additional information on the PV sites or things that they don't necessarily fall under a demand response program. How do we get to a point where we value all of those services as well?
Go for it.
I'll give a vendor perspective, so certainly willing to hear from the utilities on the panel as well. But, you know, your example about somebody who has an EV who isn't really interested in $25 is a pretty good one. And unfortunately, we can't offer everybody even what that value of that EV from a locational grid perspective might be, because we have rules about equity and things like that. But in reality, that person might be worth $300, and that would move the needle for them. And so my opinion about how to sort of move forward, again, is that each customer has sort of a elasticity, not only in sort of their load curve, but also in terms of their behavior. And so when you take a bottom-up data-driven approach, you can use that then to make the packages that you make, right? I think, Lon, you talk a lot about kind of the analytics behind what you guys are doing, and so often we are stuck in sort of the old mode of demand response program, which isn't super old, but demand response, traditional program build out. Well, what you need is dynamic programs. What you need is dynamic rebate amounts. And there's a balance when it comes to regulatory constraint to that and treating customers equitably, but at a bare minimum, you have to have the understanding of what is there and what its relative value to the problem you're solving is, and then design from there. And in an ideal world, from a vendor perspective, not limited by rules, you then have more of a real-time market for that energy with your distinct customer, be it residential, SMB, commercial. That type of design is the one that will be dynamic enough to manage the grid moving forward. And so, again, start at the bottom, move up. Obviously, you have to bend to rule and regulation, but I think if regulators can see it through those same lenses, then ultimately, nobody can argue with the numbers on the piece of paper, right, if it's the best decision.
I was going to give you your company a plug because you guys have the AMI disaggregation, so I don't need the customer to say if they have an EV because we can just use that tech. But I mean, there's other programs that you can do. You're being very gracious in Monoz. But there's also nudges you can do and just behavioral economics to try to get customers to have, maybe there's visibility, there's data. And just different ways to sign up so that if they perceive a trade-off, you can figure out a way not to have that trade-off for them.
Just to layer on, I think that the term that you have coined, apparently trademarked, the ecosystem, the more we talk about this holistic system, including generation through T&D to the customer, and look at it in a comprehensive way, you see it less as we've got this customer over here who does this, we have this customer over here that does that, and now we need to part and parcel all of these different programs so we can feed them. That's the old way of operating. Going forward and over the next 10 years, I think what we will see is that generation isn't just generation. T&D is a huge customer opportunity. The line people in the field have 1 million touch points with customers, and how do we arm them as a part of a customer program? And then how do you take that end dynamic, which is also becoming a point of generation, to create this full cycle loop? And you can leverage virtual power plants, you can use all sorts of different dynamics that will enable this, but until we stop looking at it in these like very pointed components, we're not going to be able to holistically solve for what we need to solve for. And we're all customers, we're all end consumers of power, so we all play a part in this to get to that next cycle.
Well, on that note, I think that's a great, great note to end
ending.
on.
Holy cow.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful session.